When William handed me the breakup fee for the 19th time, I finally agreed. The girl he held dear was making a fuss about wanting a title. She couldn't wait any longer. Neither could I. I was pregnant, and the child wasn't his. After signing the agreement, I quickly took a photo and sent it to William. It's signed. Should I have the assistant come pick it up? 20 minutes passed quietly. William's chat box was as silent as a grave. I was considering whether to call for a local courier when I saw William breathlessly standing at the door. He actually came himself. Of course. His little lover had been causing a stir in the city for half a year, demanding a title. It seemed he was really anxious. Go ahead, what trick are you planning this time? The things you should get, I won't shortchange you. His tone was cold, tinged with impatience. 3 years ago, William had given me a wedding. Since then, I had become his nominal Mrs. William. I had stood by him as he went from rags to riches. But for the past 6 months, he had been figuring out how to get rid of me. All just to make space for his little lover. The property division agreement had already gone through 19 revisions. I had never been satisfied before. This time, I signed without fuss, yet he seemed to grow suspicious. I chuckled lightly and handed him the agreement. He opened it cautiously, and when he saw my signature, his expression darkened. Scarlett, you really agreed? I looked at him strangely. He used to say he hated when I acted irrationally and got jealous for no reason. Now, I was being compliant and ready to walk away with money, yet he seemed even less happy? Surely, he didn't expect me to beg him to stay with tears? I smiled and said, "Isn't this good? You can marry Ava openly, and I can plan my life anew." This agreement included everything: houses, cars, company shares. He had put a lot on the line. I was open to it all. After all, it was me who had walked with him through these nameless years. Who would willingly let their past labor benefit someone else? Now, it was settled. With what I had earned over the years, plus what he was giving me. Even if I started traveling the world tomorrow, I'd have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Love might be gone, but thankfully, I still had plenty of money. William listened to me, his gaze complicated, hesitant to speak. Just then, a soft, sweet voice interrupted us. "Scarlett, thank you for letting us be together." Ava, the little canary that William cherished. She was like a golden phoenix that flew out from a mountain village. With an ordinary college degree. Getting into William's competitive company was no easy feat, yet within just 3 months, she became his executive assistant. She really worked hard to win William over. William said she was pure and kind, always afraid I would bully her. But what kind of innocent and kind person would sleep with a married man and send photos to his wife? I used to be unable to let it go. I cried and caused a scene. In a fit of rage, I even exposed them online. The next day, however, there was no trace left. William's methods were always swift and ruthless. Ironically, one day, he would use those same methods against me. After all this, I was already tired. I watched the two of them with a half smile, not wanting to say another word. "Now that you've got the agreement, are you not leaving?" I issued an eviction notice. This villa was in my name. Since William started seeing his mistress frequently, he hardly returned here. The longer they stayed, the more I wanted to sanitize the whole place. William's face darkened. "Scarlett, playing hard to get won't work on me. If you dared to sign, don't regret it." With that, he grabbed Ava and headed out. "Wait." I called after William. He turned to look at me, wearing a knowing expression. He probably thought I couldn't bear to let him go. But I just wanted to remind him. "Don't forget to transfer the money soon, and make sure to transfer the real estate to me quickly." His expression blanked for a moment, then he grit his teeth. "You're quite anxious, aren't you?" How could I not be anxious? I was pregnant, and the child wasn't his. If I didn't part ways with him now, it wouldn't end well. I had scheduled a prenatal checkup. But I didn't expect to run into William and Ava at the hospital. He was carefully holding her hand. Ava was chattering away, and he listened patiently, his eyes warm and loving. They were so intimate that it seemed no third person could intrude. Memories flooded back. Long ago, he had treasured me like this too. It felt like a lifetime ago. The last time he looked at me like that was when I had a miscarriage. At that time, I was 4 months pregnant. He had already taken his first mistress. She was a fearless girl who came looking for me, demanding I make room for her. I cursed her for being shameless, and she said the unloved were the true third parties. Perhaps my pride had been deeply wounded. She pushed me hard, and I fell down the stairs. That child was lost just like that. I was covered in blood and rushed into the operating room. When I woke up, the first person I saw was William, his face filled with guilt. He held my hand tightly, crying, "I'm sorry, Scarlett. I'm such a jerk. Go ahead and hit me, I'm so sorry." I slapped him hard, and he didn't flinch, just took it. When I finally got tired of hitting him, he hesitantly said, "Just this once, Scarlett, give me a chance to make it up to you, okay? We'll have more children." He sent that girl away. He became the caring lover again. But sadly, that only lasted a brief 6 months. After 6 months, he was with another new girl. Later, those girls changed one after another. I hadn't even memorized one young, tender face before another one showed up. Ava was the one who had stayed by his side the longest. Running into them at the obstetrics department was indeed awkward. I turned to leave. But then Ava's voice stopped me. "Scarlett, what a coincidence." She hung on to William like a big accessory. Her face was flushed, looking a bit shy. "I'm pregnant and here to see the doctor." I watched her performance with an expressionless face. When William saw the registration slip in my hand, his brow furrowed. "What are you here for?" I smiled coldly. "Mr. William, in front of your new girlfriend, it's best not to be too curious about your ex-wife's privacy." He seemed a bit annoyed, actually pushing Ava aside and gripping my wrist. "Scarlett, I'm your man. You suddenly showing up in the obstetrics department gives me the right to ask." I stared at him, my tone inevitably laced with mockery. "My man? Mr. William, are you sure about that? Although we had a wedding ceremony. I've always been unmarried in the marriage registration system." William paused, as if suddenly remembering something, and his expression darkened further. That's right, that wedding had been so romantic and grand. To outsiders, I was his one and only Mrs. William. Especially these years, our business and shared distributions were deeply intertwined. But who knew? In reality, we had never registered our marriage. Legally, we weren't husband and wife. Whenever I urged William to get our marriage license, he was either going to a meeting or off on a business trip. His time was always so precious. So precious that he couldn't spare even half an hour in 3 whole years to take me to get a marriage certificate. But when it came to breaking up, we tore each other apart over money and power distribution, making it public knowledge. He gripped my wrist so tightly it hurt, yet he wouldn't let go. Fortunately, it wasn't long before my name was called. "Please, patient Scarlett, proceed to examination room 5. Only then did William reluctantly release my hand. I immediately passed him and Ava, entered the exam room, and locked the door behind me. I ignored William's extremely dark expression completely. After the doctor carefully reviewed my test results, he gave a few instructions. He even told me to bring the father of the child next time. "He's dead." That statement hit like a thunderclap. The doctor, who had been focused on filling out the case, quickly looked up, his eyes filled with sympathy. He switched to a comforting tone, telling me to take care of myself. I cooperatively put on a sorrowful expression. Maybe it's due to early pregnancy, but I've been feeling quite sleepy. After returning from the hospital, I've been sleeping nonstop. In my drowsiness, I had many dreams. At first, I dreamed I had just graduated from college, right when William's family went bankrupt and he was left homeless. We were crammed into a tiny rented room. He held me close, wrapping me in his down jacket, resting my head against his heart. "Scarlett, once I have money, I won't let you suffer anymore. I'll hire at least 5 people, one to cook for you, one to do your laundry, another to make your bed." His vigorous heartbeat echoed in my ears. His sweet words made my face flush. I naively believed that his love could conquer all. Later, he truly made a comeback and achieved great success. But more people started to surround him. Those people came and went, like the love that William couldn't hold on to. Toward the end of the dream, I was amidst the wreckage, stepping on broken shards of porcelain, bleeding from my feet, and crying in despair. He watched me lose control, unfazed, and said, "Scarlett, you look really terrible." In that moment, I looked at him. The person I once loved deeply in my youth seemed to have suddenly rotted away. When I woke up, it was already dark outside. I groggily prepared to get up when a sudden voice startled me. I heard, "You're pregnant with my child, yet you're spreading rumors everywhere that I'm dead." I jolted and turned to the sound. There, in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, stood a man, bathed in moonlight, his dark suit shimmering silver. The room was unlit, and he was hidden in the shadows, making it hard to notice him if he didn't speak. "James, are you trying to scare someone? You're going too far." James laughed at my words. He walked to the bed and pulled me into his arms. His warm body heat seeped through my thin nightgown, and his hand gently rubbed my lower back. When he spoke again, his tone was filled with helplessness. "Who's being excessive here, Scarlett? First, you slept with me and then ran off. Now you want to take my child and leave?" James guessed correctly. My plan was to take the child and settle in a small town, far away from William and James. After all, our beginning wasn't glorious. It was 3 months ago, on my birthday. William suggested we celebrate my birthday one last time before parting ways, to end things amicably. He had booked a restaurant early on, a windowside table with a view of the night skyline. He came to pick me up, as if nothing had changed between us. He brought out a cake, lit the candles, and said, "Make a wish." At his urging, I closed my eyes, feeling conflicted, and silently wished, "My wish is." It only took about 10 seconds. When I opened my eyes, I stared blankly at the empty spot across from me. William was gone. I waited for a while, but he didn't come back. Eventually, the waiter informed me, "Mr. William just received a call and left. He instructed that you should finish your meal and leave. He's covered all expenses today." I watched as the candles on the cake burned out, the cream slowly collapsing. The words "Happy Birthday" turned into ugly red blotches. Finally, I laughed mockingly. After leaving the restaurant, I took a taxi to the harbor. When I was poor and couldn't afford to travel elsewhere, William loved to take me for walks at the harbor. He always said if we couldn't see new sights, it was nice to feel the sea breeze. But the sea was still the same. The people had changed long ago. I wandered aimlessly for a long time until I suddenly heard someone exclaim, "Oh my gosh, this is so romantic." I followed their gaze to the night sky over the sea, a dark canvas dotted with countless blinking drone lights, forming romantic cursive, "Ava, I love you." A few seconds later, the night sky burst into countless blossoms. Brilliant, beautiful. I almost self-harmed by opening my social media. Sure enough, I saw Ava's bragging post, "True love means that no matter the time, as long as I say I miss him, he can give me a confession." The accompanying photo was of the drone confession. When a person's heart dies to the extreme, they might become indistinguishable from a madman. I bought a lot of alcohol to drink. There were too many people by the seaside, and William and Ava were together, surrounded by oblivious passers-by, completely unaware of me. I watched them for a long, long time. Until I noticed that my surroundings were filled with empty bottles, and my vision started to blur. Realizing it was unwise to continue drinking, I finally got up and staggered away. After finally escaping the noisy harbor, I walked along the road but bumped into someone. "Be careful." He held my hand to steady me. As I straightened up, I finally saw the person, James, the heir to a fortune. Over the years, I had some dealings with him due to business investments. I could say that 2/3 of my fortune was earned thanks to his family's group. He was the complete opposite of William, with hardly any women around him. People in the circle joked about whether he was gay. He never denied it. "Scarlett?" He steadied me, frowning. "Why have you drunk so much?" He smelled good, very clean, unlike William, who always carried Ava's perfume scent. "James, they say you like men. Is that true?" I blurted out, feeling a bit confused. My tongue felt a bit numb, probably from the alcohol. James was taken aback for a moment, then sighed helplessly, carefully helping me into his car. Maybe it was because he looked appealing to me. Or perhaps the alcohol dulled my rationality. Or maybe, I just wanted to get back at William in a roundabout way. I quietly leaned closer to James and kissed his cheek. He turned, surprised, looking at me. In that moment, his pupils flickered. His fair skin turned a faint pink. The next second, I boldly climbed onto him. "James, do you want to try something with me?" Getting too close, my lips brushed against his earlobe. It felt soft. I decided to kiss him. His earlobe slightly heated up. A voice came from above, a bit hoarse, "Scarlett, wake up." I smiled, "I'm awake." I know you men like young and beautiful women, a simple "I'm tired of you" can dismiss them. The desire inside me surged, and I instinctively wanted to lean toward a cooler spot. His brows furrowed, his expression unreadable. I tilted my head again, seeking another kiss. This time, he didn't dodge. His lips were cold, with a refreshing mint scent. It smelled wonderful. The kiss was intoxicating, and I felt like I was about to suffocate. But he held my head with one hand and my waist with the other, forcing me to continue. Mm. The car's partition rose at the right moment, sealing us in a private space. Finally, he released me, his voice even hoarser, "Scarlett. I don't like men. And I don't like the very young." Huh? His reflexes were so slow. After kissing, why say that? The alcohol wasn't enough to make me black out, but my mind was indeed a bit cloudy. Before I could think it through, James had already started the car. Soon, we arrived at the destination. James carried me from the back seat, crossing the villa's living room and quickly going upstairs to the bedroom, gently placing me on the bed. Standing above me, he watched as I lay there. My eyes were fixed on his lips, the ones I had just kissed, moist and glistening. They were a bit swollen, red. Looking down, I noticed he had unbuttoned two of his shirt's buttons. His collarbone was exposed, making him look like a seductive male fairy. He smiled slightly, holding my hand and slipping it under his shirt. "Scarlett, do you want me?" "I want." After receiving my answer, James leaned down and kissed my lips. Unlike the previous kisses, this one was deep and intense, as if to release his strong possessiveness. The heated kiss traveled down. "Scarlett, do you like it?" My face was burning, and I could only cling tightly to James. At first, I bit my lip, refusing to answer. But eventually, under James's onslaught, I succumbed. I buried my face in his neck, sobbing, "I like it." He kissed me in satisfaction. In the end, I fell into a deep sleep in his arms. When I woke up the next day, he was already gone. I understood the meaning. He must be someone who avoids trouble. Just as well, I also wanted to avoid complications. Since he left, I naturally had to pretend nothing had happened. It was better for both of us this way. So I ran away and deleted all his contact information, cutting ties completely to avoid any awkwardness. As for business, I'd let my subordinates handle it, just keep things professional. After that, I hadn't seen James again. Until a few days ago, when my period was late, I suddenly remembered, after that night, I hadn't taken the morning after pill. I secretly bought a pregnancy test. I took it 5 times, and each time, it showed 2 lines. I was completely confused. After my last miscarriage, the doctor had said it would be difficult for me to get pregnant again. Where was the difficulty in that? How did James manage to hit the jackpot on the first try? I was lost. Logically, James had the right to know. But thinking back to his attitude that day, I wasn't sure how he'd react. Just in case, I decided not to say anything and planned to break up with William quickly, figuring out a good future for myself and the baby. Unfortunately, before I could arrange everything, James came looking for me. "Scarlett, why did you block me?" His lips were close to my ear, his voice cold, but his warm breath spilled over me. "You didn't regret it after sleeping with me, did you?" His attitude caught me off guard. I didn't expect him to care so much about me blocking him. To avoid further misunderstandings, I decided to clarify, "James, we're both adults." That night, I started things, so I accepted the consequences. You can check with the hospital, you should know. I'm definitely keeping the baby. I have money and can handle everything myself, so I won't bother you. If you're really worried, we can sign a confidentiality agreement. James, who had been kissing my earlobe, suddenly froze, his voice dropping even lower. You're going to handle it alone? What if the baby asks about his dad? What if he wants to see a photo of his dad? I had thought this through. I'll tell the baby his dad died. The photo can be AI generated, and for the cause of death, let's just say it was an accident. If you're not happy with that, you can come up with a more respectable story for yourself. Of course, if you want to see the kid later, that's fine. He can just call you uncle. James first frowned, but then, surprisingly, he laughed in disbelief. Call me uncle? Scarlett, what do you think I am? I was taken aback, unsure of his meaning. I thought I'd provided a backup plan, and he still wasn't satisfied? James, I just didn't want to trouble you too much. After all, you left so decisively that day. As I spoke, I watched James's expression, considering other possibilities. Was it possible he knew I was pregnant and changed his mind, wanting to fight me for custody? James took a few deep breaths before speaking again, sounding resigned. I don't see you as a trouble. I was slightly stunned, a ridiculous thought creeping into my mind. James looked deeply into my eyes and explained seriously, that day, there was a problem with a project at my branch, and I had to deal with it personally. I left you a note asking you to wait for me. So, you didn't see anything. A note? I hadn't seen one. In this tech-savvy age, who writes notes? Besides, I was so embarrassed that I just wanted to escape. I had no time to check for notes. James continued, when I finally tried to contact you, I found out you'd blocked all my numbers. Scarlett, do you really see me as someone to be ashamed of? I laughed awkwardly. That's a bit much. But we can't just sleep together and then get married, right? He looked down and asked, why not? I widened my eyes in disbelief. Are you serious? James, do you really like kids that much? James's gaze was intense as he looked at me for a long time, his voice deep. You can say, I'm just doing it for the sake of the kid. Of course, I didn't agree to James's suggestion. That was ridiculous. After all those years with William, going from being in love to barely standing each other, we couldn't even end things well. I didn't want to leap into another situation without thinking. James didn't push me, just stared as I added his contact info back. He also insisted I let him know when I went for prenatal checkups. I frowned. Is that really necessary? Maybe it was just my imagination, but there was a strange tension in his smile. Didn't you say I like kids? A person who likes kids wouldn't let you go to checkups alone. Fine. I respected his rights as the biological father. Besides, he was still my business partner. I had to give him some face. From then on, James started to care about my food and clothing and even bought baby supplies. Once, while on a business trip abroad, he personally ordered a custom-made crib. The crib was stuffed with all kinds of diapers, baby formula, and lotion. He seemed genuinely excited about the baby's arrival. Slowly, I got used to it. Until half a month later at the auction. When James and I entered together, we ran into William. Ava was holding William's arm, her eyes gleaming with pride. It had been a while since we last met. When William saw me standing next to James, he seemed momentarily taken aback. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Ava didn't give him the chance. Darling, I'm a bit tired. Let's sit over there, okay? She turned back to me with a mocking smile, before leaving. I ignored her. After all, being pregnant meant I had to avoid any sources of annoyance. The auction items were rather ordinary, and I was losing interest until I spotted a necklace. It was beautiful, something I had wanted for years but never managed to buy. The starting bid was 800,000. I raised my paddle first. Ava was quick to follow. 1 million. 1,000,005. In the end, it was William who raised his paddle. 3 million. He knew I had wanted that necklace for a long time but still chose to bid against me, deliberately giving it to Ava. I glanced their way and caught Ava's smug expression. I knew she didn't genuinely like it, she just didn't want to see me happy. 3 million, first time. 3 million, second time. I didn't raise my paddle again. James squeezed my hand, wanting to raise the bid. 500. Before he could finish, I quickly pressed down on his hand. 5 what? Are you crazy? He looked a bit innocent. 5 million isn't too much. Didn't you say you liked it? I scoffed. How is that not too much? You just haven't experienced being broke. Only someone who had truly been poor would understand that 5 million is a lot. When someone hits rock bottom, they might fight over 500, let alone 5 million. But I figured James wouldn't understand that. I shook my head. Let's not argue over this. I don't like losing money. William's 3 million is already way over the necklace's worth. If he wants to be a fool, let him. After all, the property settlement agreement had long been signed by William. Any money he spent now came from his share. 3 million might not seem like much, but every little bit adds up. I'd prefer he kept spending until he was broke. 3 million, third time. Sold. With the auction hammer falling, it was final. After it ended, the crowd began to disperse. Ava deliberately walked by me, starting to brag. Scarlett, are you mad? It's all William's fault. He didn't care when he saw I liked it. I'll let you borrow it to look at. William silently watched the scene. He certainly spoiled Ava, letting her dance in front of me time and again. I forced a smile. No need, I don't like it that much. If you want it, go ahead. After all, what good can come from something you've set your sights on? I shot a pointed glance at William beside her. William's expression visibly darkened, and he snapped. Scarlett, how did you end up like this? It's just a necklace. Is it really necessary to be so bitter? I'll buy you a new one if it matters so much. I looked up, taken aback, then fixed my gaze on him. No need. Like you said, it's just a necklace. I'm not lacking anything. William hesitated, as if recalling something. I'm a jewelry designer. When he started his company, the first big break came from me selling my design rights for $1 million. He had held me tight with red eyes, promising to buy me lots of jewelry in the future. But in the end, he only gave me an ordinary ring. I was his girlfriend for 4 years, and his wife for 3. With a tiny diamond, he took away my most precious 7 years. Promises are only sincere when spoken. And sincerity can change in an instant. In the end, love is all about conscience. Now, he has his company, and I have my career. My jewelry design brand is already globally recognized. I can buy whatever I like. I no longer need him. William seemed to recall the past, looking a bit lost. When he looked at me again, there was a hint of guilt and nostalgia in his eyes. Just then, James's tall figure suddenly stepped in, completely blocking William's gaze. His voice was lazy, but dripping with sarcasm. Mr. William, long time no see. Changed your taste to green tea? He casually glanced at Ava when he mentioned green tea. Ava barely held back her anger, her face almost contorting with frustration. I was done watching. James, let's go. Calling his name in front of everyone seemed to please him, and he smiled. Okay. I thought that would be the end of it, but William suddenly had a change of heart. I usually keep my phone on silent when I sleep. That day, I woke up to see over 30 missed calls and 99 plus WeChat messages. All from William. Scarlett, we need to talk. I'll come find you. Is anyone home? Where are you? Last time you went to the gynecologist, what were you checking? Are you pregnant? If you are, I can promise not to separate. If you don't reply, I'll wait for you at the door. Scarlett, why weren't you home all night? Why did you even fire the maid? Because I had already moved out. That house held too many of his traces, and I couldn't stand it, so I sold it. When James found out, as the father of my child, he kindly offered me a villa on an island, complete with a private doctor and nurse. The island is beautiful, with a lovely climate, perfect for pregnancy. I didn't refuse. Who would? James wanted to enjoy his fatherly rights, so he had to give a little in return. It's called an equivalent exchange. James and I had gradually developed this understanding. As for William, according to the agreement, there are still many assets he hasn't transferred to me. There's no way he could back out now. I called him back immediately. William's voice came through the receiver, weary and a bit raspy. Scarlett, I asked the previous maids, and they noticed you were taking medication for maintaining the pregnancy. If it's true, we can hold off on separating. I suddenly lost patience. When someone's luck runs out, even taking medicine can attract unwanted attention. But I understood the truth wouldn't stay hidden, so I was mentally prepared. Before William could finish, I interrupted him coolly. I am pregnant. But who says the baby is yours? There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear William's rapid breathing. After a long moment, he coldly countered. Scarlett, what do you mean? When William finally traced me down, I was playing with my dog, Egg Yolk. James had adopted it for me, worried I might get bored. It's gentle and friendly. It loves to lie by my feet in the sun. William was taken aback when he saw me. You really are here. If I remember correctly, this property should be in James's family name. He stared at my belly as if trying to burn a hole through it. When did this happen? I tilted my head and smiled, telling him. Remember my birthday? The night you left halfway through to confess to Ava with a drone. William's eyes widened in disbelief. Finally, he trembled and said. Scarlett, we haven't separated, and you've already cheated on me? In his eyes, it seemed like I was the one at fault, the true betrayer, deserving scorn. I couldn't help but laugh sarcastically, retorting. Have you thought about me all those years when your lovers changed like seasons? When you were with Ava, getting her pregnant, did you ever think of me? He knew he was in the wrong and had no arguments. Standing there for a long time, he reluctantly uttered. Scarlett, give up the child. Let's stop the drama. I'll go with you to the civil affairs office, and we can get married and live a good life, okay? I was so angry I laughed, staring unblinking into his eyes. Give up? Do you really think that's possible? I've had a miscarriage before, and the doctor said I might not be able to have kids again. Do you remember why I miscarried? What right do you have to decide the fate of my child? His body shook, and pain flashed in his eyes. Fine, then have the baby. When your health is better, we can have our own child, how about that? I felt like I was hearing the biggest joke. I couldn't help but look at him like he was crazy. Do you even hear yourself? With red-rimmed eyes, he made one last concession. Scarlett, for you, I can accept this child. Just then, a low chuckle came from nearby. It was James. He loosened the top button of his shirt and began with a lazy sneer. Trying to have my kid call you Dad? William, do you deserve that? Suddenly, the atmosphere became tense. When William saw James, it was as if his anger had been ignited, and he lunged forward. James? It's you. Unfortunately, he didn't get the chance to clash with James, as the bodyguards quickly restrained him. He seemed to forget whose home this was. With red eyes, William struggled against the bodyguards, trying to confront James. But reality was harsh, and with a simple push, he fell to the floor. James merely sat on the couch, legs crossed, expressionless, his face as cold as ice. Are you leaving on your own, or should I have someone throw you out? I was a bit surprised. Though James held a prestigious position, his poise was always praised. Even when facing a business rival, I'd never seen him lose his cool. This was the first time I saw him this angry. And William had come alone, despite his reluctance, it was futile. Looking defeated, he stumbled to his feet and handed me a box. I didn't open it, I guessed it was the blue velvet box. It was the necklace Ava had stolen, the one I had longed for. He lowered his head and told me. Scarlett, at the auction that day, I didn't really want to take your favorite thing. I just wanted to make you jealous, to get you to soften up. I got the necklace back, I'll make Ava give up her child. You love this necklace, right? Let's get back together, okay? Yes. I once loved it so much. He knew perfectly well, but still sided with Ava, using it to humiliate me. He also knew how much it tore me apart every time I cried and fought with him. Yet, he kept hurting me over and over again. I spoke calmly. I don't like it anymore. The necklace, or you. I don't like either of you anymore. William's face turned deathly pale. Scarlett, stop being so stubborn, okay? Do you really have the heart to leave me? I couldn't help but find it laughable. Back then, it was him who hurt me the most. And now, how could he act like he was the victim? I looked at his reddening eyes, pulled my clothes out of his hand, and said seriously. William, you're the one who destroyed everything. If we're breaking up, then let's do it completely. Don't make me lose even more respect for you. 3 days later, William and I were at the notary office, finalizing the property division. William looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, clearly not having slept well. But now, whether he was doing well or not had nothing to do with me. At the moment we parted ways, it seemed like William had something to say to me. But before he could speak, Ava suddenly showed up. Her usual mask of gentleness was gone, replaced by anger and frustration. William. She's already pregnant with someone else's child, so why are you giving her so much? I thought you were just going to give her a breakup fee. But you even transferred that $80 million villa to her? Have you even thought about me and the baby I'm carrying? I frowned slightly. Ava probably didn't know that what William gave me wasn't just a simple breakup fee. Every business deal he made, every dollar he earned, I had a share in. Without me from the start, he wouldn't be where he is today. I was only getting what I rightfully deserved. And besides, Ava was being a bit too impatient. William was the kind of person whose passion came in waves, but was always short-lived. She dropped her sweet, loving wife act way too fast. That's never a good thing. Scarlett, don't think you can take advantage. Ava screamed at me like a madwoman and charged at me recklessly. Enough. William shouted angrily, stopping her in her tracks. Are you done embarrassing yourself? Ava froze at his shout, her eyes instantly filling with tears. She threw her designer bag at William in a fit of rage. Embarrassing? How could you yell at me? You've already broken up with her, but you still want to protect her? More and more people gathered around to watch. William's expression grew more irritated, and finally, he exploded. Even if I don't marry Scarlett, I would never marry you. Ava was stunned. A second later, realizing what he had said, her face filled with panic as she rushed to grab his hand. But William, looking completely indifferent, forcefully pushed her away. Stay away from me. That's when the accident happened. Ava had always loved dressing up, and even after getting pregnant, she didn't change her ways, still strutting around in her elegant leather high heels. She liked using them to flaunt William's affection for her. But with that push from William, she lost her balance, stumbling and rolling down the steps several times. She fell to the ground, her face pale as she clutched her stomach, crying out in pain. My baby. William, my stomach hurts so much. William's face also went pale as panic set in. About 4 or 5 seconds later, blood began to trickle down between Ava's legs. I felt a pang in my chest. Back then, my child with William was lost in the same way. Was it fate? For someone so fickle and unfaithful, it seemed even blood ties could be shallow. Or perhaps, even in the womb, a baby can sense when its father doesn't love it. And so, it left, heartbroken. This world may be wonderful. But it just didn't want to come back. Because of Ava's outburst, word about James and me eventually reached his family. The next day, James's grandfather ordered him to return to the family home. He specifically mentioned wanting to see me, too. In the car, I couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. James reassured me that his grandfather was easy to get along with. I believed him. But the moment we walked through the door, his grandfather's brows furrowed and stayed that way. Though already in his 80s and needing a cane to walk, the old man had a commanding presence. He narrowed his eyes and said in an uncompromising tone, "Kneel." His voice echoed throughout the hall. James didn't hesitate. He took off his suit jacket and knelt straight down. Even I was so shocked I trembled slightly. Wait, does this mean? I have to kneel, too. My mind was full of questions. But then, James's grandfather saw me, and his attitude shifted in an instant. He smiled warmly and walked over to me kindly. Don't be nervous, child. Sit down, Grandpa's not a bad person. I just want to give this brat a lesson for bullying you. You just sit on the sofa and watch. I was utterly confused as the housekeeper helped me to a seat. When James met my eyes, he gave a slight smirk, as if to tell me not to worry. It seemed like he was used to kneeling and could handle it. But I still overestimated him. Because the next second, he said, Grandpa, Scarlett's sitting. Can I stop kneeling too? That did it. The moment he spoke, his grandfather's temper flared. Without a word, the old man picked up his cane and smacked it against James's back. You rascal. You've got the nerve to talk back? Have you forgotten the family rules? I introduced you to so many women, and you refused to meet any of them. And now, you go and sleep with a good girl. What a disgrace to the family. With every word, the old man hit harder. I was stunned by the scene in front of me. In this day and age, there were still families who used such strict discipline? James, who had such an impressive reputation outside, was now kneeling here obediently, taking a beating. I tried to speak up for him. Grandpa, actually, this wasn't James's fault. I had been drinking that night, and I made the first move. But before I could finish, James's grandfather interrupted. Don't defend him. So you were drunk, but what about him? If he hadn't had bad intentions, would any of this have happened? He clearly took advantage of you. Just watch how I teach him a lesson. The old man was serious about punishing him. After about 10 more strikes, I could see blood starting to seep through James's white shirt. I hurried to stop the cane. You can't hit him anymore. James's grandfather didn't listen and tried to grab the cane back. In the midst of the struggle, James, who had been kneeling obediently, suddenly stood up and shielded me. Grandpa, you can hit me, but don't push Scarlett. She's pregnant. At that, James's grandfather froze, his hands suspended in midair. After a few seconds of shock, his eyes suddenly lit up. A baby? Are you saying I'm going to have a great-grandchild? James paused for a moment. Didn't you already know she's pregnant? You called me back to scold me, didn't you? James's grandfather shook his head in confusion. It turned out he had only heard bits and pieces of the story and didn't know I was already carrying James's child. I had come to James's family, prepared to negotiate custody of the baby. But after hearing the whole story, James's grandfather asked me when we were going to have the wedding. Grandpa, you're changing the topic too quickly, aren't you? I had to explain. Sorry, I'm not planning on getting married anytime soon. At that, James's grandfather went quiet, then glared at James with disappointment. What are you doing? How have you not won her over yet? He didn't even try to hide his words from me. I turned away awkwardly. Then I heard James's amused voice. I guess I'm just not very smart. But I'm working on it. I'll try harder. That night, James's grandfather arranged for us to stay at the family home. He even made a point of saying there weren't enough rooms and put James and me together in one. His intentions couldn't have been more obvious. The bedroom had a sleek, monochrome design, clearly James's personal room. James took off his blood-stained shirt and asked me to help him apply medicine. His skin was pale, making the bruises and cuts look even more striking. I took the ointment and carefully applied it to him, my fingers brushing against the skin on his back. His body felt warm, almost feverish. Suddenly, James spoke in a hoarse voice. My grandpa's always hoping I'll get married. He's a bit overenthusiastic, so don't take it the wrong way. I softly responded with an to show I understood. Old folks often just wish for a big, happy family. After finishing with the ointment, I let out a long breath. I casually glanced around the room. Suddenly, a pair of cufflinks on the shelf caught my eye. Why do they look so familiar? As if possessed, I walked over, picked them up, and my heart pounded with disbelief. James, why do you have these cufflinks? James' gaze flickered to the cufflinks, then settled on my face. After a few seconds of silence, he lowered his eyelashes slightly. You gave them to me. I stared at him in shock. How could that be? I sold these cufflinks 8 years ago. James took the cufflinks from me and let out a deep breath, as if he was mentally preparing himself to explain. 8 years ago, a girl was selling these at a stall outside the university. These cufflinks have 6 blue and white diamonds, intricately detailed, almost on par with luxury brands. But she sold them to me for only 800 yuan. She said she designed them herself, so they weren't worth much. She sold them because she wanted to buy her boyfriend a new phone. Halfway through, James looked up and gave a self-deprecating laugh. At the time, I thought she was pretty, but also a little silly. I often passed by that street, and I would see her selling things at her stall. If she hadn't had a boyfriend, I definitely would have tried to pursue her. Later, she graduated, and I went abroad. I thought we'd never cross paths again. But then, a few years later, her designs started showing up at global jewelry auctions. And later still, she came to me, leading her own jewelry brand. As I watched her approach me step by step, the feelings I'd buried reignited. For years, I kept telling myself she was taken, and I shouldn't disturb her. But then one night, she suddenly stumbled into my arms. Dusk had fallen. In the dimly lit room, the yellowish glow from the lamp softly illuminated us. A light breeze blew through the old house's window screens, carrying with it a gentle coolness. James' voice grew quieter. That night, you kissed me first. Scarlett, after that, how could I ever let you go again? I stood there, stunned by everything I had just heard. And James was already holding my face, kissing me deeply. Later, I gave birth to a beautiful, rosy-cheeked daughter. James was always by my side, but I hadn't accepted his proposal yet. There was no particular reason. I just didn't want to feel trapped by another relationship. Only those who've been caged know how precious freedom is. Besides, love and marriage are two very different things. I wasn't ready to dive in again so easily. Our daughter took my last name, and we named her Adora. I watched Adora grow from babbling her first words to starting school. Before I knew it, 7 years had passed. When people talked about James, they'd say he'd gone from a young, handsome CEO to a golden bachelor. James would always clarify, time and time again. I'm not gay, and I'm not single. I have a girlfriend. I also have a daughter. My daughter's beautiful. James' grandpa was still in good health and often grumbled, half-jokingly. Sure, you have a girlfriend, and you have a daughter. But you don't have a wife. Your daughter calls you uncle. Of course, Adora knew from a young age that James was her real dad. But she was very attached to me. Every time James came over, he'd insist on sleeping next to me, clinging to me even more than our daughter did. So Adora would be sent off to her grandma. To tease him, she'd purposely call him uncle. After being called uncle by his own daughter, James would come to me at night, looking pitiful. He'd hold me and kiss me repeatedly, his tone full of grievance. Scarlett, you heartless woman. When will you finally give me a proper title? He held my waist as I lazily poked his abs. We'll see how you perform tonight. And see what mood I'm in tomorrow. James grumbled that I was just making empty promises. In the next second, he buried his head down, kissing me even more fiercely. Later, I heard from a friend that William was dead. After losing her child, Ava wouldn't let go of William and kept clinging to him. She threatened him, demanding he marry her and take care of her for the rest of her life. But William was long tired of her, and refused to give in. He even tried to fire her from the company. Ava, desperate, used her position to leak company secrets to a rival and uncovered several financial issues. William was overwhelmed, losing several big deals before the company eventually went bankrupt. He hated Ava, and during one heated argument, he accidentally pushed her down the stairs. Perhaps feeling hopeless and in despair, William followed and jumped after her. When I heard the story, I simply responded, I see, without a trace of emotion in my heart. After all these years, hearing the name William felt like something from a past life. My friend sighed. You two were so good together back in school. I remember William bringing you lunch every day, helping you with your studies. He couldn't go a day without you. All the girls in the dorm knew how much he loved you. How did such a good guy end up like this? I listened quietly, as if hearing about a stranger. Mom, come play. Not far away, my daughter was waving at me. James was playing fetch with our daughter and the dog. I quickly hung up the phone and took the frisbee from my daughter, throwing it into the distance. The dog ran freely, and my daughter laughed happily. James glanced over at me. In that moment, his gaze was warm and tender. Life was peaceful. End of main story. William's perspective. After the breakup, William secretly went to see Scarlett 3 times. The first time was at the hospital. At the time, Ava was constantly pestering him, and years of smoking and drinking had wrecked his health. When his stomach disease flared up, he ended up in the hospital. In unbearable pain, William couldn't help but think of Scarlett. When they were together, even if he winced after a night of drinking, Scarlett would worry about him. If he got sick, Scarlett would be even more heartbroken. He always thought Scarlett loved him so much that she'd never leave him. But now, as he lay there suffering from stomach bleeding, even hearing her voice was a luxury. Scarlett had deleted his number long ago. Thankfully, he still had their old chat history. He obsessively listened to the voice messages she'd sent him in the past. "Babe, come pick me up after work. By the way, we should plan a trip to Iceland this year, to see the northern lights. William, Mr. William, happy birthday. No working overtime tonight, and no complaining about my ugly cake." Her voice felt so close, playful, sweet, and sometimes even angry. He ignored the later arguments, the fights where she tearfully asked if he still loved her. It was only after losing her that he realized he hadn't grown tired of Scarlett. She had become a part of him, like oxygen, seemingly unnoticed, but impossible to live without. Later, by chance, William saw Scarlett again at the same hospital, in the maternity ward. She was there for a prenatal checkup, with James by her side, dressed in a suit, tending to her every need. At that moment, William had to summon all his strength to resist the urge to run up to her and beg for forgiveness. Instead, he fled. The second time he saw Scarlett was 3 years later. His company was in trouble, and he was desperately seeking funding. Passing by Times Square, he saw her jewelry ad on a massive screen. She had become a renowned designer, with both business acumen and artistic vision. While his career had stagnated, she had left him far behind. William spotted her in person, standing beneath the giant screen in a vibrant red dress, likely attending some event, posing for pictures with reporters. She looked stunning. And he, disheveled and worn out, could never catch up to her. Tears welled up in William's eyes. The third time he saw Scarlett was at an amusement park. The sunlight was perfect that day. James was holding his daughter's hand in one hand, and shading Scarlett with an umbrella in the other. The three of them were dressed in adorable matching outfits. The little girl laughed heartily, at first calling James uncle. As she kept calling him, for some reason, she suddenly changed her tone and called him daddy. James seemed stunned, repeatedly asking the girl for confirmation. "Adora, what did you call me? Can you call me a few more times? Quickly." The little girl felt a bit shy, but under Scarlett's encouragement, she finally happily hugged James. "I called you daddy. Daddy, daddy, daddy. What, don't you want to be my daddy? You'd rather stay, Uncle James?" James, for some reason, looked like he was about to cry from happiness. Meanwhile, William stood far off in a discreet corner, watching the scene with jealousy. By then, his company had long gone bankrupt. Ava was like a cancer, torturing him to the point where life felt worse than death. He was so jealous, that James had won Scarlett. He regretted it even more. If he hadn't given in to temptation back then, the one holding Scarlett's hand now would be him. They would have a child together, and they too would be wearing matching family outfits. If only there was a time machine in this world, how wonderful that would be. Then he could travel back to the time before he hurt Scarlett. She would still be his Scarlett. But unfortunately, all of this was nothing but a delusion. Ava came to pester him again. This time, in the middle of an argument, Ava threw his old phone out from the 10th floor. The phone shattered into pieces. William completely lost his mind. That phone had the voice messages Scarlett had sent him in the past. For all these years, he couldn't bring himself to delete them. Every sleepless, unbearable night, he relied on those voices, like a drug that poisoned him slowly. But Ava destroyed it. In that moment, all his sanity was consumed. He pushed Ava down. "Go to hell," he said to Ava. And to himself. As her body fell, the rushing wind whistled past his ears. "Scarlett, if I am gone, will you think of me occasionally?" "Forget it, just forget it. END.